Oorim Toomim and Eliza Jezelle by John W. Lavender. Chapter 1. The Big Mistake. Before the absolutely infinitesimal point of nothing blew itself to kingdom come, Oorim Toomim and Eliza Jezelle were already known in perpetual existence. It was they who forged the clash of titans, and they who existed always and forever. There was no time when they were not, nor moment their relationship sparked form into formlessness, and vice versa. It was only time that conjured the illusion they were or they were not. They were in every thought of the gods, and every law that evolved into matter and no matter where consciousness was, they were. They were the eternal creative impulse, continually and contrarily within each other, and it was due to their existence that myth and philosophical speculation were riven with huge gaps that require further explanation. Further explanation being their modus operandi. "If I say white, you say black," said Eliza. "It's not true," said Oorim. "Yes, it is." "No, it's not." "Yes, it is." No, you don't understand. If I say 0, you say 1. This argument continues forever until zeros and ones that created all of existence are used up. No, you don't understand, said Oorim. Eliza began tickling Oorim until he conceded. "Yes, it's true." No. Please stop. I can't stand it anymore. Oorim slapped his leg and rolled over, trying to contain himself. Tears ran down his face as he grasped his sides and rocked in mirthful convulsions. Eliza coquettishly shook her head in fake disdain and folded her arms against her full bosoms. None of this went unnoticed by the Titans, who had sprung into existence as Oorim and Eliza argued millennia upon millennia. They had taken sides, as zeros became ones, and the hesitation in between created universes and anti-universes simultaneously. However, it was the demiurge that created dominion over it all, whether a legitimate claim was debatable. Nevertheless, the cosmic computer deduced that all of creation emulated Eliza's form, her rounds, her curves, and for that matter, all the straights described by Oorim's nose and short shanks between his knees. All that exists would have been infinitely long if it were not for the limited dimensions built into the cosmic matrix, which, along with soft and hard, began in a flash of heated discussion. These facts, along with mirthful contrariness, were the causes of all that was and is and yet to come. But very early in this process, the demiurge knew a mistake had been made, and the mistake manifested itself in a very large snake. The snake, being a female variety, Miss Snake, represented all the curves and rounds and straight shanks in one biological and ethereal being, along with all the contrariness and aversions imaginable. The 0, or no, emulated curves and rounds in the forms of O, and the number 1, or yes, was the source of all other numbers, and emulated the straights and short shanks. It was these stop-and-go motions of no and yes, ones and zeros, that expressed the movement of the great snake in waves of sound and light. Oorim once remarked to Eliza, in a moment of meditative speculation, that creation wasn't a big mistake after all. It was, in fact, a big joke, hence the cosmic comedy. And it was in the contemplation of these circumstances that Oorim Toomim and Eliza Jezelle found themselves on a very small blue planet below Triangulum and directly opposite Andromeda. They were looking at their reflection in a muddy pool of water. The wind rippled the surface, and they stooped down to see themselves more clearly. "You're very curvy," said Oorim. "And you're definitely short," said Eliza. Looking toward the east, they marveled as they surveyed a wondrous panorama. Before them lay a great savanna filled with flocks of birds whose wings glinted in the sun as they swooped in unison over a blue-green lake. Streams meandered through the lush vegetation. Flowers and fruits were in full abundance, and there were trees and shrubs of every kind. Mammals with large ears and long noses sprayed themselves with water, while black and white striped ponies roamed freely abroad. There were many other creatures, of course, too numerous to describe. "This is a very beautiful place," said Eliza, as Oorim admired a shell-like creature that took a liking to him. "That's all very well, but why are we here?" said Oorim. "I don't know. I suppose we should just sit back and enjoy the ride. Take a swim, have a snooze." That is exactly what they did. They relaxed under the shade of an enormous but gnarly tree, and as the sun reached its zenith, Oorim felt a slight gnawing in his mid-part. And at that very moment, an orange-colored fruit fell into his lap. He examined it carefully, poked it with his finger, and screwed up his eyes in analytical wonderment. "What do you think it is?" he said, pushing his fingernail into the soft flesh and peeling back the mottled outer skin. Then, by applying further pressure, he managed to squirt sticky juice into his face, licking it gleefully. In her role as teacher, Eliza began explaining some all too obvious facts to Oorim. "All created things have geometrical segments," she said. "Try pulling them apart." Oorim followed her instructions and cautiously took a bite. "It's very good. You should try some." Stop. Wait a moment, dear listener. Let's just take a moment to pause and reflect, because the first mythological inconsistency is about to take place according to the annals of time. It was, in fact, the male gender who took the first bite of fruit from the tree of good and evil, and not the female gender. Of course, Oorim Toomim and Eliza Jezelle were not exactly human. But why is this inconstancy so important? Because women have been blamed by men for their own weaknesses. Nevertheless, it was quite accidental that Oorim took the first bite. He always tested everything by putting it in his mouth first. "This is absolutely delicious," affirmed Eliza. Together they sat under the shade of the orange fruit tree, watching fleecy clouds move across a blue azure sky, and listening to creatures playing around the lake. As they did so, they felt the cooling breeze of the wind. The sun was warm, and they finally dozed off. It was late afternoon when they awoke. "You know," said Oorim, "that sun is disappearing behind those mountains over there. And," said Eliza, "just an observation. Did you notice the light is fading as well, and the shadows are growing longer? Maybe everything will disappear when the sun goes behind those mountains over there." They sat in awe and anticipation. The sun set, the stars began to twinkle in the sky. Then a moon rose and cast a lesser light around where they were sitting. "It's all still here," said Eliza. "That moon over there reflects light," observed Oorim. "Stop talking and just experience it," admonished Eliza. That was how Oorim Toomim and Eliza Jezelle spent their first day and evening on the small blue planet they called Earth. They named it Earth because they had landed in soft mud surrounding the pool of water in which they saw their reflection for the first time. Then there was the morning of the second day, on which they decided to explore the savannah. There were many curious things to observe, such as plants, fruits, and flowers, all of which they tasted heartily. Different textures, very kind. One thing to which they were less accustomed was the fact that what went into their mouths eventually came out a different part of their body, and in a different form. "Maybe we shouldn't eat or drink," said Eliza. "It's obviously all right, otherwise they wouldn't be able to pass it through," said Oorim. "True. Learning how things work on this planet is going to be interesting." On another day, as they were sitting on a mound by a lake, the earth began shaking from below. They jumped up, and just as they did, a hand appeared out of the mound, then a foot, then 2 feet, another hand, and then in an unexpected whoop, a creature, covered with earth and mud, sat up from the mound on which they were sitting. The creature could only make inarticulate noises. It was coughing and having difficulty breathing. Eliza took a deep breath and breathed air into the creature's nostrils. Then they helped him up and washed him off in the lake. I say him because he had the same body parts as Oorim, although not as short in the shanks below the knees. The creature looked at them wide-eyed and blinked dumbly. "My name is Oorim," said Oorim, pointing to himself. "And I'm Eliza," said Eliza, pointing to herself. "What is your name?" asked Oorim, and hesitantly said, "Me," pointing to his chest. "Oorim." "Me, Oorim," croaked the creature. "Yes, Oorim," said Oorim, rephrasing vowels and consonants. "Oorim. Yes, Oorim," the creature replied. "This is not going to work. We should give him a name," said Eliza. "You," pointing to the creature, "you man." "You man," the creature repeated. "No, no, no," said Eliza, waving her hand. "No, no, no," repeated the creature. "I man," Eliza said. "Amen." "You man," Eliza said, pointing to him. "And me, Eliza," pointing to herself. "You man," the creature said, mimicking Eliza and pointing to his chest. "He'll get it soon enough," said Oorim, then walked off, leaving the creature behind in a stupor, repeating to himself, "You man." And seeing Eliza and Oorim had walked off, he began following them. "This is inconvenient," said Oorim. "Do something. Or do you want him to hang around with us all the time?" said Eliza. "Shoo him away," she said with a wave of her hand. Oorim made every attempt to get rid of "you man," but wherever they went, he continued to follow them. "Well, I suppose we should help him. What he needs is a mate," said Eliza. "A mate?" "Yes, a mate." "A mate? Yes, you know." "Oh," said Oorim, finally understanding. "And how do we do that?" It was at this very moment that the cosmic computer, encouraged by Demiurge, who had learned to manipulate all the zeros and ones in the universe, made an adjustment in its programming. How these things happened, Oorim and Eliza did not quite understand, but they seemed to occur at the moment something very significant was about to happen. In this case, Human fell into a hole and cracked one of his ribs. Eliza, who knew all there was to know about everything in the cosmic matrix, extracted an X chromosome from Human's DNA and injected it into the womb of a passing cow. Within days, the cow came to full term, and a she-man was born. Without going through the pain of explaining who she was and where she came from, they named her Eve, because the sun was about to go down as she was delivered. Eve was born a fully formed female adult. In every way, she was like Human, except her curves were more like Eliza's, and her shanks were stretched out longer than Oorim's. For the sake of decorum and fairness, it concurred that Human should have a proper name as well, and shortened Human to Adam because he had been increased through one of his chromosomes. Adman, therefore Adam. As Adam's DNA had an X and Y chromosome, and Eve had two X chromosomes, she was considered by Eliza to be twice half the man Adam was. Oorim, however, argued that Eve was missing something very important, but he couldn't say exactly what it was, and so the argument continued throughout the night. In the morning, both Adam and Eve were holding their mid-parts moaning. "It's annoying," said Oorim. "We need to find an orange fruit tree." Fortunately, a tree bearing orange-colored fruit was close by, and they showed Adam and Eve how to eat them, segment by segment. "It's probably best we find other things to eat, so we can have all the nutrients necessary for a healthy body," said Eliza. Eating and naming things became their obsession for the next few days. Of course, they had a number of accidents, caused some discomfort in the form of expulsions from various orifices in their bodies. Another difficulty they had to snip in the bud was Adam's puppy love for Eliza. "Shoo," she would say. "Go and play with Eve." It was with some concern that one evening Adam and Eve did not return. In fact, it was several days before they saw them again. When they did appear, they were excited about something they had found. "Tree," said Adam, opening his arms to full span and making a motion that it was very, very large. "Sky," he said, and pointed toward a range of mountains far away on the horizon. It took 2 days, but eventually they came to a lush area between two rivers. Large pink birds with long necks that had an annoying habit of standing on one leg, statuesque in the shallows. Trees with a long trunk and an umbrella of fronds at the top stood majestically leaning to one side or another, and shrubs with large pointed leaves grew alongside flowers that, at first sight, looked like multicolored birds. Then they came to a cascading waterfall, whose source was a high mountain covered with clouds just below its peak. A rumble of thunder came from within the clouds and flashes of lightning. But this was not the only wonder they experienced in this place. Adam and Eve urged Eliza and Oorim to continue farther. It was hard to see exactly what it was they wanted them to observe, because of a thick mass of branches that obscured their vision. After scaling the mountain, they stopped and looked back, and what they saw was a huge tree with its roots in the sky and its branches touching the earth. "It's the tall tree," said Eliza to Oorim. This was the tree that connected both Oorim and Eliza to the entire universe. For Eliza, it was the relationship with all biological life. with healing and longevity. For Oorim, it was the metaphysical planes of all-pervading consciousness. This was the source of who they were and from where they received perpetual life. Adam and Eve were also drawn toward the tree, but Eliza and Oorim knew they had to keep them at a distance from it. If they stayed too close, they would cease to be, and planet Earth would also cease to be, disappearing in a cosmic bang. Nevertheless, all creatures born on the planet were intimately connected to it. They were its blood and flesh and reason for existence. If their flesh was transformed to an eternal substance by contact with tall tree, they would become one with all and all for one, and the planet would no longer need to exist. It too would be transformed. The purpose of creation was to live and thrive in physical bodies on a physical plane of existence, which for Adam and Eve was planet Earth. The all, like the cosmic computer, was a manifestation of cosmic energy. It could just as easily be in a different form, but in this time and place, this was how it manifested itself. A tall tree could change its form in a moment, because it was the essence of all forms. In fact, Oorim and Eliza were a limited form of tall tree themselves. And truth be known, so were Adam and Eve, and everything else for that matter. "Hurting," said Eliza, who gave Eve a gentle tap on the back of her hand. Eve, in response, turned round and slapped Eliza's face with the full force of the back of her hand. "Hurting," said Eve, who went off in a huff, grabbing Adam's hand and pulling him after her. "A few days of her, and I'm appreciating you even more," said Eliza to Oorim. "What do we do now?" "Well, what we really need are some fire-breathing creatures with big claws to keep everyone away from this place until Tall Tree returns to the All." This was where Oorim's talent for creativity became useful. He noticed on days when he didn't particularly have anything to do, he would imagine fantastic creatures changing form in the clouds. All he had to do was create a myth around huge flying snakes with wings and claws and say that they breathed fire like lightning and roared like thunder. That would keep everyone away, he thought. Oorim demonstrated the fire-breathing snake in front of Adam and Eve by gesticulating and making noises like thunder and slapping his own hands and saying, "Hurting, no, 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 stay away from, shlabam, boom, hurting." And he slapped his hand again. Adam and Eve looked at Oorim in amazement. "Oh, I think that should do it," said Oorim. "You mean making a complete fool of yourself is a deterrent for not going near Tall Tree? You try then." Eliza demonstrated, following Oorim's example, but the more contortions of her face, "Hurting, no, 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 stay away from, shaboom, boom, hurting," she said, pointing in the general direction of Tall Tree. Adam and Eve shrugged and took off at a mild pace, leaving Oorim and Eliza wondering if it had been a big mistake to come to this planet in the first place. Now that their progenies seemed to be looking after themselves, they stopped worrying about them so much and enjoyed exploring the rest of the planet. It was their practice, however, to keep an eye out for Adam and Eve while taking an evening stroll. Casually, they would point out stars and galaxies to each other while glancing in the direction of the two humans. This all seemed to be working out well until one day they met Eve by herself, distressed and flushed. When Eve saw Oorim and Eliza approaching, she hid herself behind a great shrub. "Oh, no, no," she cried, and cowered as they approached. Eve was covering herself with her hands and crossing her legs, and crouched low as she ran from bush to bush. She also put her hands over her eyes as Oorim and Eliza passed by. "What's got into her?" said Oorim. They might not have given it a second thought if they hadn't seen Adam acting in exactly the same way. The only difference was that his arms were full of fruit, and the fruit were purple and not orange. "Uh-oh," said Eliza. "We had better check out what they've been eating." While running for cover, Adam dropped a fruit, and they picked it up. "What do you think it is?" said Eliza. "Well, here goes nothing," said Oorim, and took a large bite. "Well," said Eliza. Oorim's eyes had become big as he looked at Eliza. You should try it," he said, and offered the half-eaten fruit. Eliza took a bite. "Oh," she said, "I know what this is." She nibbled it some more, and looking at Oorim, began to giggle. "What is it?" "It's passion fruit," she said. "They shouldn't eat it. Its peel is poisonous." "We can't monitor everything they eat," said Oorim. "They have to learn by experience." "Give them a break and let them get on with it themselves," said Eliza. And that's what they did. And they walked back toward Tall Tree. Eliza pointed at Oorim's short shanks and giggled some more. "Passion fruit," she said.